Talk shoes. Recorded live.
All right, hey everyone, it's LouLombardi, aka Loudini from the Loudini Rock and Roll Circus, and welcome to yet another interview, part of our interview series here. Today I'm speaking with singer, songwriter, multi-instrumentalist, all the way from up there in Ontario, Canada, Mr. Ed Roman. Ed, welcome.
How's it going, eh? Lou, how are you, man?
Oh, real good. I was going to say, you're not wearing a toque, are you? I don't know if you get that joke.
You know what? I was going to go, is Lou going to know the record? Did he listen to it as a kid? You know, did he have it at Christmas when they released it, and there's Getty on the sleeve? Hey, $10 is $10, you know.
That was the greatest, wasn't it? Okay. All right,
just that whole era of people that were even in and out of Canada and the United States, too, that were collaborating. I mean, Bob and Doug McKenzie, Doug Thomas, and sorry, I'm trying to remember his name. From SCTV, Rick Moranis.
Rick Moranis,
right.
Yeah.
The two of them were in their own right amazing comedians. They still are today. And Doug's brother was Ian Thomas from the Ian Thomas Project, who was also a huge band in the 1970s as well, right? Painted ladies and a bottle of wine, mama. Ooh, that was him. Right? So having that whole connection with Rush and Getty and the Canadian sort of conspiracy, and that, it was just like, I love that record. I put it on last Christmas. I was listening to it. I'm like, wow.
The Canadian conspiracy? I didn't know it was a conspiracy. I have some notes here that say that you like conspiracies and stuff like that, too.
Well, I can't, I come from a really big political background. My dad was really heavily involved, first of all, in municipal politics for like 30 years.
Okay.
And on top of that, he was also the first coalition candidate ever in the history of federal politics, which meant that the leaders of each of the Conservative and Liberal Party ousted their leaders and asked my dad to run as an independent in Ottawa, and he won. And he was also police commissioner for 14 years. He was also the chairman of the York region, of our region, for 6 years, and then had an untimely death at 55. He died of a brain tumor, and he also fought multiple sclerosis for like 20 years in the process. But aside from that, because of international politics and that my uncle was involved, because my uncle was also a very sort of, you might say, a wealthy businessman in this country as far as mining corporations were concerned. He had a big deal with uranium, with the federal government for uranium plants. And at the same time, in that process, you can't help but not be, either engaged by other people and or people try to coerce you into certain issues. So, for instance, without going into it, my uncle had Richard Nixon in his house dying. He had Brian Mulroney at his house dying. Pope John Paul II came to bless the cathedral that my uncle built in the local town that we were living in. All of that made me, as a young boy and into my sort of teen years, privy to conversation and, at the same time, the realization that there's something else, there's a bigger picture going on here that most people aren't aware of. And even my dad's sort of time in politics saw such corruption and collusion and stuff that was going on with the lobbyist system that was mostly being driven by sort of the corporate welfare of things. Today, I can now say, 20 some odd years after he's passed, on the cusp of Father's Day and talking about this, that some of the things that he was talking about before he passed are coming to fruition today. And things don't happen overnight always. They're planned. They take a long time in order for them to succeed. And then before you know it, changes happen. And the public usually is unaware or they're left in confusion because despite their disdainment for what's going on, they really don't have an opinion. and I could point out so many situations, whether it's been in American politics and in my own case, but especially Canadian politics, where things, are being turned a blind eye to, and the public seems to be mute on the whole topic. That for me leads me into that channel of what a conspiracy is, a conspiracy theory. And today, those two words put together seem to alienate people because of their thoughts and opinions. But if you separate them, those two words, a conspiracy and a theory, they both have legitimacy in their wording. And I mean, if you look it up in Webster's, what a conspiracy is and what a theory is, they both make sense. And theoretically, there's things that have occurred that don't add up. And some of the things that have been changed very quickly happen almost seemingly instantaneously without, resolve or the proper channels or time being spent investigating and looking into what those things are. So it's very easy for me to kind of follow what that is and see what it is. And also, in some cases, when I see things happening, also go, you can kind of draw a picture out of this. The old, if it walks like a duck, talks like a duck, well,
right.
It's probably a duck.
Okay, so with this, this background in politics, from your family, and this interest in, this sort of how you notice that, as you say, things don't add up, which I think that, even the most mainline people, even here in the U.S., are scratching their heads about it. With all that, how do you get into music? Like, tell me what happens. How do you get into music? How do you become a musician?
Well, with that said, I grew up in a very busy household because there was eight of us. My grandparents, my parents, four, my brothers and sisters and I, so four of us. It was 1970s. There were poker games, bridge games, political meetings. Because we also had the farm and we had cattle, there was always cattlemen at the house. And at the same time, the TV and the radio and records, I'm talking vinyl, they offered me this sort of escape from the insanity of what was continually happening. But in that process, just by, growing and learning from people in and around me, I started to realize the potency of what music was, especially in the language. And as a kid, too, I also struggled with dyslexia. So academically, there were issues with reading and writing, and music was just a natural way for me to sort of just let it out and express myself and write stories and not be so worried about being judged on spelling and grammar and all of that. If anybody knows anything about dyslexia, and I'll say two things about it. One, first, never look at it as a problem. There's so many people that are being diagnosed with new kinds of problems. It's just people that are dyslexic may be wired slightly different, and because of the situation, the way that our cognitive skills work, it's not like we're stupid people, but we need to absorb things multiple times. And when we do that, we cannot help but have this sort of photographic imprint of the information because you're looking at it repetitiously, and out of necessity. That's why that happens. It's not that we're smarter, but our brain develops differently. So, and it's the same thing with other people. I've met bipolar people and autistic people, or people are like, "Why I'm bipolar?" I find them fantastically interesting people. And same thing with autistic people. Usually, they're more devout to a certain topic in a situation. Socially, they may be awkward as far as the way they approach people and the subject matter they talk about, but they're highly intellectual people.
Okay.
So all of that allowed me then to say, hey, I want to do this. I want to play music. And artists like Jimi Hendrix at a young age, and Jaco Pastorius, because I'm a bass player by trade, and Bob Dylan or Marley, or so many people in the jazz world of things, Mingus, Charlie Parker, Coltrane, Cole Porter. There was, and not only that, in that era, because there's three generations of people growing up in a house, there's all of that music floating around, from rock and roll to folk music to jazz music to stage music to anything you can think of. So I was like inundated with it, and at that time, there wasn't technology and people on their cell phones in their bedrooms. It's like we had three stations we got on our television. One was from like Buffalo, New York, and the other two were Canadian stations. And other than that, you made your own entertainment. You played games, and I sang songs for people in the kitchen when I was a kid. When people would come over and they'd laugh because I'd write funny tunes or whatever, and then it was something about ducks in my pool or something like that. And then so I went, hey, there's got to be something here. There's an attachment for me.
Okay, well, so because you're a kid and you're entertaining your family with these songs. Were you playing guitar or?
Yeah, we had my grandmother when my grandparents first came here from Europe in the 20s. She had a job cleaning the Heinzman house, or like the piano family, the famous piano family, like their house on a regular basis. And when my grandmother had finished, after her service, Mr. Heinzman had given her this beautiful old upright piano that was like a pre-patent piano even. That sat in the corner of our like front room where like the front door was and staircase that led upstairs. And then my mom somewhere found, like, from the world famous knapsack company, they made a travel guitar in the 60s. You know, and it was missing 2 strings, one of which, I think it was the D. I had a piece of fishing line on there. That was my kind of way to be my, to have my sort of zone. So it was those basic instruments that sort of gave me the gateway for it.
Okay. All right. So you're like playing so you've got like sort of makeshift guitar, travel guitar, and you're writing. You start writing songs. That's the first thing you do when you pick up. So did you take lessons? Did you eventually get into being schooled musically, or are you completely self-taught?
Well, I mean, that's the thing. I mean, my mom wanted to put me in piano, and I took a year of it, and it was at in a church in a basement with a lady with glasses, and for me, it didn't feel right at the time because I was like 8.
Right.
And I still wanted just to make noise. And I think that's healthy for a young mind and ears to do that, is just to listen to themselves. And being a teacher for almost 25 years, I know how valid that can be. But then, yes, of course, I never had any instruction through grade school, which drove me crazy because they removed the music program in 1976 when I would have got hands-on instruction with the actual music and a music teacher. High school is when I first got my hands on a bass, and then I skipped a grade, and then I won the music scholarship, and I went on to Humber College, and that's where I studied jazz performance. And
because I definitely was going to talk about that, because you definitely have jazz chops. I can tell from your songwriting. I'm like, I was just listening to your record again this morning. I think the song Rosetta, is it called Rosetta Stone? Am I saying that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and that sounds like something out of the real book.
Thank you. I was trying to channel a little bit of Duke, and I was trying to channel a little bit of Horace Silver, and I was also trying a little Strayhorn there too. It's sort of my lush life kind of vibe.
Cool. Wow. Okay, there's a couple of things that we want to get to here today because we have. Okay, so you've got a record. You've been doing records for a long time. You had a band in 2000. Refresh my. I'm clicking around here.
That was Special Ed and the Musically Challenged.
Yes, that's a great name, right?
That was a play on obviously my time in special education because of the dyslexia thing. But we challenged ourselves with the music. The music was all over the place in terms of jumping from genre to genre, from song to song, and inside even a song we would do that. So in consequence, we would be challenging our listeners. And some people are like, man, that's a self-deprecating name, dude. And I'm like, no, you don't get it, right? You come into the show and watch it. And Dave Patel and myself and Mike Friedman and Richard Pell, we were a quartet for a while, 2 bass players. We then broke down to a trio, just the way things were working. And we made music together for 20 years. We were writing and doing stuff. I mean, I'm the principal songwriter. I write the stories, the arrangements, the melodies, but when we're collaborating, it's like the music evolves because that's what's supposed to happen. I mean, the writing process and doing that kind of a thing it's one of 2 things. You can either make it a dangerous situation, because if you keep locked in a mode of thinking, what was the last great thing that people liked I did, and be worried about what that is, you very quickly stagnate in your thought process and your writing processes. The most important thing is you keep writing, and eventually you find that envelope that all that stuff needs to go into, and it starts working. Even in the songwriting process, it's like people say, well, where does a song come from, or how do you write a lyrical idea or a melody? And I always say, look, if you're in a car or you're in an elevator, or you're sitting on the toilet or in a bathtub or walking down the street, you might get this thing, this melodic idea, very simplistic, could be a grouping of 2 or 3 notes. But as it evolves in your head, because it almost becomes this sort of concentrative, meditative thing, the ideas start to present themselves because it's like a path. And if you follow that path, the idea then starts to come. And as it comes, you start to realize, wait a minute, this is what's supposed to be here. And inside of that, even through the collection of chords that may follow what that melody is, or even lyrically the chords that may follow that idea, all of that starts to show itself in a way. And same thing when you're working with other people and collaborating. As the idea is presented, people start feeling those things. They listen to the emotion of the content, then they start to go, okay, this is what needs to happen. And so often I don't like that process where you're in a studio and people are saying, this is the way it has to be. Maybe you've written the tune, it's been arranged, you're a hired gun. But when you're collaborating artistically with a bunch of people, you just got to let it happen. And when that happens, there's a very beautiful thing. It's like an amalgam of multiple emotions that really take form. And the song becomes something that much more special because of it.
When you sit down now, okay, so when you sit down to write, or do you sit down to write, is it just sort of like kind of come, like, because you were just sort of describing it as sort of some notes, a grouping of notes coming to you, do you sit down, and I wanted to ask you too, being a bass player, or do you write with the bass?
Yes, I do, definitely. But see, the thing is, sitting down to write, I would say I sit down to write because I need to write out a chart and a melody to give to people. But when I write, it happens anywhere at any moment in time.
Gotcha.
That's the thing, is to pay attention to when that feeling comes, because it comes often. Sometimes it's frequent or infrequent, but so often you go, what was that idea I was thinking? And if you didn't sort of take that original sort of trailhead moment, you're sort of lost as to what had happened. So it's even just like little bits of scribbles and words, or a melody idea, or a chordal arrangement, even just to write it down somewhere so you have it as that figurehead when you go back, because it's there for a reason.
So when you you try to like, or you don't try. You're just, as the muse sort of like comes upon you or contacts you or reaches out to you, you just sort of go with it, and it's never a sort of like, okay, now I need to sit down and write this next record.
Well, yes and no, because like it's funny, we're all. A good buddy of mine, Dylan Hemming once said, and he also, by the way, he's a fabulous Hammond organ and piano player. He's a good buddy of mine. He just said, look, we're always defined by our influences and our limitations. And when you're, a musician that's writing and playing and performing, you might not always be listening to music all the time. That's one of the things for me that I try to consider myself more as like a feral musician, living out in the bush, sort of not always paying attention to the track, because the track's always running. So when I do that, I find more of myself inside of the music. But in the same token, listening to people, like in the last 6 months, I could say I've been listening to the Derek Trucks Band, Mingus again. I've also been listening to Dylan. I've also been listening to Harry Belafonte, and I've also been listening to some Billy Joel, for that matter. And in that, the last grouping of tunes that I was just going through a bunch of Billy Joel numbers in my head, and I'm so impressed with his sort of positioning of lyrics and the way that he sort of outlines the story. It's like very much like Dylan. And if you even hear him talk about Dylan, or Springsteen even for that matter talk about Dylan, those words themselves, they're conjuring what the total phrase is, okay? But ultimately, just even inside a few words, there's more going on in a level of depth inside of the writing. So I've been trying to find lyrical content that has imagery to it, but at the same time, when you hear it, you know that there's something that's stirring something in you now. It's making you think about things that you just saw or heard about, but not directly saying it, obviously.
Can you give me an example of something you've written or you're writing that?
Well, yeah. I mean, like I'm for the new record that I'm working on that'll be released in the spring of 2016. It'll be like probably 16 numbers. There's a tune on there now the record's going to be called Red Omen, which is really an anagram of my own name. And okay. I wanted to try to pay homage to a lot of the people that are helping me in where I'm at right now in my career without directly saying it. So, for instance, one of the people is obviously Michael Stover, and there's a lyric in it where it goes, well, there's a red-hot stove down in Pittsburgh going out hard like a cherry pie. You know, call me a fibber, call me a liar, say it to my face, like a cross between Benjamin Franklin and Ian Pace. Then there's another guy who introduced me to Michael Stover, who used to be in the military, and the lyric reads, and I didn't believe the man from MI6 living out in the sticks who souped up his side-by-side like Evel Knievel. So in that phrasing, you can conjure anything you want up in your imagination about what it could be, but really I'm trying to say thanks to Michael, and I'm trying to say thanks to Ken. So, without directly saying, hey, thanks, Mike Stover, da-da-da-da-da, I'm using the elation that I'm feeling from these people in some poetic way.
Okay, so this brings up an interesting point, because you sort of, I know that you're politically minded in that. So, I mean, one of the criticisms of sort of quote unquote political music has been that, well, okay, if you write a song about the Obama administration, well, then 8 years later that's over and we're on to something else, and so your song is now irrelevant. But if you're doing something more like the way you're describing it, that you can have that message in that time, and it can also become timeless.
Well, that's it. In the last record, in the song "I Told You So," which is the first track off the record, there's a lyric in the second verse that says your exact statement. Another hand inside the puppet of an ass, falling down on the ground and crying, "He's your savior." It could be anybody that has that hand in that puppet. And who's the puppet this term?
Right.
And then you don't have to say Nixon, Clinton, Bush, Obama. It's just there's always a puppet. There's a bigger agenda, and that's what I'm trying to say. And we fail to see that the placation is the semantics that we find ourselves involved in arguing about it, when really there's far bigger things happening.
Okay. You mentioned Bob Dylan.
Yes.
And like most people who are sort of categorized as singer-songwriters, almost everybody's got some I love Dylan. Okay, so Dylan, just aside for a second, and can you talk a little bit more about other influences? I know you were mentioning some jazz, and you were talking more nebulously about how your upbringing and stuff. But is there anybody that you go these guys right here, I'm they're kind of like my go-to guys? Or
well, I would say
wrong with that.
Well, that would be definitely one. Would be anybody that listens to my bass playing would be like he loves Jaco Pastorius. Okay. I mean, and the reason for that is because of the prowess that he offered. And maybe at the same time, I was so impressed with him on a multitude of levels. Jaco was originally a drummer. He broke his wrist playing football, and he couldn't really do it as well. He was a traditional grip, so he started playing the bass. His father was a musician. He has other musicians in his family still playing today. He was at the forefront of that movement of the 1970s, and people like Herbie Hancock and so many people worked with him because of his ideas and abilities. And he's a piano player. He played the bass. He was an arranger. All of those things that, for me as a young musician, pushed me to be like, wow, these people are more than just, a flash on a stage with pants. They're trying to be that, because to me, Jaco was like Hendrix. He was out there throwing salt on the stage, wearing flip-flops with his hair in a ponytail at the top, wearing a T-shirt and black shorts, and when the curtains would open, Peter Erskine would say, and there he would be sliding across the stage like James Brown. Or I've heard people in stories where he'd be playing two basses. There's one on his lap and another one in his hands. Then he'd put the bass down on the stage, he'd play a whole bunch of cluster chords, all of a sudden run away from the instrument, start sprinting towards it, turn a flip in midair, come down, and hit a bunch of harmonics on the bass. People were, aside from his bass playing, he was a showman. And
right.
I also liked that about his personality. But then again, a dignified musician at the same time. He was definitely a go-to, and from probably the age of 14 still to this day, I'm still analyzing his music and looking at it. And then Hendrix is another one of those people who, for me, really turned me on to Dylan. And
that's what's true of a lot of people.
For sure.
A lot of people, yeah, for sure.
And the realization that there was also this cultural divide that Hendrix, or even Mingus for that matter, would talk about. Because here Hendrix was accepted by a predominantly white audience, and the black audience that was into something completely different were pressuring him. And he would even hide when he was listening to Dylan records because he didn't want to be judged or scrutinized. But he loved what Dylan was saying and how he said it. And it's the same thing with Mingus. He's like half white, half black. He's got some Cherokee in him. He didn't fit in any normal genre or grouping of people, and people would ask him about music, and he'd say, well, it's all music. When he'd say, I go to Europe, they call me an American artist. They don't say I'm a jazz musician. And for me, that's also why I allowed myself the license as a composer or a writer to say, hey, you know what, on this record, there's going to be a pop tune, folk tune, a jazz tune, a progressive number. It's okay. Because, look, you put on a Beatles record, I love the Beatles, there's so many different genres that you can say, well, this just kind of feels like this kind of feels like this. And not only that, inside the songs themselves, there's time changes. So you might go from 4/4 to a bar of 3, then to 2/4, and back to 4 again. So I love that sort of moldable aspect of music without having being so clinical and there being some kind of an equation that says this is what makes music right.
Okay, that brings up another point. When you listen to the Beatles, right? You'll hear rock and roll, blues. You hear stuff that sounds like maybe traditional British folk music or show tune type music. But at the end, it's unmistakably the Beatles, no matter what song, no matter where they are. And that's something that I noticed about your music is no matter where you venture, it's got that head sauce.
Oh wow!
Lou, it's like there's this thread that runs through it, and it's you just attribute that to sort of just like your own sort of interpretation of these styles and how they just sort of flow through you, or is there something conscious going on there? Do you have a sound that you're trying to find?
Well, you know what? That's an amazing question, and I think it ties into the fact that out of necessity is the reason why I write. And I mean that because for me, aside from trying to make a living out of it that I'm doing now and struggling in the process, at the same time, the reason I started was because it made me feel connected. It made me feel connected to myself, my surroundings, and all of those things. So even if I never made a dime, I'll still be on the sunny side of the street, if you'll excuse the pun, right? So for me, that's the biggest thing, and in that process, I'm always trying to be honest with an interpretation. If I'm doing a tune like you say you were listening to The Spirit of Radio, because that's where that came from for that person and that writer. When Neil Peart wrote the lyrics and how they put the song together, that's the way the band felt it, and that's how it made me feel. So even in that process, I always say to artists and other people or students that I'm working with, it's so easy, and once again it ties into my statement before about defining yourself with another artist. You can imitate people. You can be, hey, he sounds exactly like Hendrix. He sounds exactly like da-da-da. She sounds like da-da-da. But how do you sound? I'm always trying to even ask my students and myself that question, or other people. I could say, well, that song sounds, that's the arrangement for this, or this is the chord structure for this. I could point out 20 different songs that all have the same chord structure, but it's the emotional content that means something behind it. And also to me, it also has to do with how you play with that information that makes it yours. Because, people can say, well, I stole this lyric from here, I've heard this before, in songwriting sessions with people I won't name names with, but it's like, yeah, we took the drum part from this, and we took the chord arrangement from this, and I'm like, that's how you put it together? Like, to me, it's like going to a scrapyard with that and then trying to build a car. When for me, the car is already there, or the stone, or the figure in the stone, is already there. You just need to already pull away the dirt and the grime, and you'll start to see the figure, because it needs to be there. So hopefully, and I take your compliment, wholly to heart. I really appreciate that. I'm hoping that translates. So when you hear it, that has that defining sound.
Well, yeah, absolutely, for sure. You definitely, there's that thread, and no matter what, everything we've done, we've played you a few times on our radio show, and that no matter where you are, no matter what you're exploring, you have that sound. But speaking of different sounds and influences, I'd like to talk for a couple minutes about the song Jamaica, your trip to Jamaica, and you did some humanitarian work as part of that. Can you talk to us about that a little bit?
Absolutely. I mean, just saying the word makes me feel good. Jamaica.
Okay.
It's I've always wanted to go there, even as a young kid. Listening to people say, "Oh, we went on a trip to Jamaica. It's so beautiful. The people, and time goes by, and you start to realize you need to take a little time and do something with yourself, and maybe take a vacation. So my wife and I, we said, look, she's been wanting to go ever since I met her 20-some-odd years ago, and I said, well, let's do it. Let's go. So we went for the quote-unquote, resort experience, but in a very short period of time, hanging out with musicians at the resort and other people that worked there. We were off campus, as I will call it. And in that process, and going back now a number of times over the last 3 years, have felt so reinvigorated as a person because of the connection that people still have with themselves there. And I won't lie to you, there's a lot of poverty. If you don't leave the walls of the quote-unquote, resorts, you don't see what that is. The average Jamaican makes $135 every 2.5 weeks. And if you go shopping there in a normal grocery store or markets, you start to realize that, some of the food there is at par here. So it's almost next to impossible to kind of get ahead. And it's hard for me to sit there in a beautiful tropical paradise environment and watch people struggling. I can't do it in good conscience. So in the last 3 years, what we've been doing is there's a company here that has shipping barrels, and we collect things from neighbors and friends and anybody that wants to donate. Plus, over the course of about, every 3 months, from dollar store things to things that go on sale like soap and toothpaste and toothbrushes, books, pens for the kids, things they need for school, any kind of little thing that we can find that could be utilized. That in some cases you're like, why is this at a dollar store? Nobody's buying it. What? They don't have that. So we send barrels about 3 times a year, and they go to a couple friends of ours, one of which is a minister that runs the African Zionist Methodist Church there, and another friend of ours that is now a family member because we're godparents to his youngest daughter, Imani. And that all has tied us into the cultural community of the island, and we just love giving back in that way whenever we can, and being able to, have other people, like I said, family, friends, neighbors, be able to contribute. Everybody then feels like they're doing something. And at the same time, Lou, in the process, because I'm a musician and hanging out, I've been buying guitars when I go there. And this guy's got a little place in Ocho Rios. I buy a guitar. It's like $115. They're decent. You can plug them in. They're tunable. They're acoustic. And I teach kids while I'm there. Go around and I talk to people and I say, you have some kids, or if there's kids hanging around, would you be willing to? Yeah, sure. Come on. 4 o'clock. Come to the cabin in the jungle. And I do this. And at the same time, when I'm done, I give the guitar to one of the kids. And the idea is that, look, you keep learning, learn from other people, show other people what you can learn or what you've learned, and give back. And the reason for this is because one of my friends, Clive Johnson, we call him Blow Blow, he's a horn player, alto player, flute, tenor. he went to Alpha Boys School, and Alpha Boys School is run by a Christian church there, Catholic church. They bring wayward boys and orphan children from off the streets, and they teach them 5 trades, one of which is music, electrical work, carpentry, all sorts of stuff. But music is one of them. And that's the only school in all of Jamaica, other than some of the high schools that have donated instruments, have limited access to instruments, have small band programs. So I was like, so many of the guys and people that I've met playing at the resorts that are my buddies now all went to Alpha. So I thought, okay, I'm going to talk to some people. I'm going to talk to the police chief in Ocho Rios and a couple of and that's a whole other story. I'll get into that another time.
Okay.
And also a couple of the youth group organizations that are running football groups and art programs. What do you think about a music mobile idea? Because they have a bookmobile that goes around, and there'd be a bus with a driver and a music teacher and instruments, and the kids in the parishes and the schools, they'd get an hour and a half, the bus would come in, they could play instruments, they could learn the basics of music, which is super important, and it would work. And it would be greatly sponsored, a public sponsorship, nonprofit organization. And I went and found Bunny Wailer, who was the last surviving singing member of the 5 of Bob Marley and the Wailers. And I was trying to get his blessing, on the whole idea, because he's trying to start a school there as well. So all of that is kind of made me feel, like I said, once again, human. Western civilization, there's so much going on all the time, and there isn't Jamaican culture, but they still communicate, and it's kinetic, and it happens on a porch at 11 o'clock at night with 16 people sitting around playing guitar and eating, and that is what I miss. It's what I remember as a kid in the 70s happening continually in my home. And at the same time, it's now happening on a porch in this beautiful place. So it was so easy for me to do these kinds of things, to participate in it and want to do that. And when I get a chance to talk about it, I do.
Okay, good. That's very powerful. Way to create music is that sort of like just sort of quiet connection with people and not a whole lot of, worrying about what it's going to be or just kind of going with it and in a sort of low tech sort of way,
Well, and you're right, Lou, because that's really like Bob's story. Bob's from St. Anne. The story goes that Bob begged this guy that had a shop with a guitar in the window over and over again. He had no money. This is when he was really little, before he got older and he was welding and all that other stuff. And finally the guy said, look, just take the guitar and get out of here. And that was Bob's thing. That's how Bob... So I figured it can happen just like you said. It doesn't have to be in this huge thing. It doesn't have to be filled with, overhead and all. It's kinetic there. So just let it happen that way.
We forget that sometimes, and so it's good to have that reminder. Speaking of kinetic, okay, trying to segue here. You mentioned briefly Spirit of the Radio. You did a remake of this. I don't like the word cover because you didn't really cover it. You did your own thing with it. This was part of a contest. So tell us about that.
Well, Anthem Records and Alba Music is also holding a competition. They hold multiple competitions, but this one in particular is the 40th anniversary of the band's existence. They're on the road. They've just announced as well, too, that this will be kind of their last tour. And they're videotaping it all, and there's a huge competition, which is $5,000 in cash plus flights out to Los Angeles, tickets to the show, accommodations, and all this stuff. And Stover says, look, man, this is right up your alley. So I was like, okay, great. And for me, there is even a greater highlight behind it because, I was working on the tune and farting around in the studio when Mike Jack showed up, who's my co-producer. We work together all the time. And he's like, what do you, that's great. Like, we should do, and I'm like, nah, I'm just farting around. He goes, no, let's record it today. And we were planning to work on something completely different. So when it was done, we were like, this is pretty cool. Do you think they'd let us use it? So here I went online and I started doing the research, and contacted Anthem, and I sent them a copy of it, and I said, is it okay if I put it on the record? And they were like, yeah. And I was like, oh, cool. And later, I was doing an event that I do every year. It's for a hospital fundraiser, and one of the guests was Alex Lifeson. So here I am, first of all, playing, in front of Alex and hanging out, and I finally got to actually meet him, and we had a nice little talk, and we sat down and had a little food, and it was amazing, and I just felt so honored. At first, I was like, blah, 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 like stumbling over my words, and I'm like, let me start all over again. Hey, Alex, how's it going? Can I sit down? And from there, it was great, and I just, for me, it was like, wow, like a childhood, band that I loved to listen to, that inspired me, and here I am hanging out with Alex talking about the song that's on the record, and I'm like, this isn't happening.
What a great experience.
Oh, highlight.
One of the big highlights of your career thus far.
Yeah.
So moving forward, what's next? So you said you've got Red Omen you're working on as your next record. You have some touring coming up?
That's right. I'm headed to New York City. I'm really excited about that. Start spreading the news. 25th, 6th, 7th, and 8th. I'll be playing in Manhattan, right around Central Park, places like Bitter Ends, which is the oldest, rock and roll folk / clubs in New York City. Dylan's played there, Joni Mitchell, Neil Young. I mean, I could go on and on about the list of people. Pianos, I'll be playing Auto Shrunken Head. They're all clubs in around in that area. And I'm off to Philadelphia for one night in PA. And I'm just excited to be playing and out on the road and doing some stuff for that part of the summer. Man, I'm Canadian, and there's so much snow, and it's so cold up here. I know it's cliche, and here I am like bitching about it. People are like, suck it up, you're Canadian. There's nothing written anywhere that says Canadians have to love snow, or anybody.
Really?
So being in New York in July, I'm feeling lyrics coming.
Well, folks, you've heard it here. Not all Canadians are like in love with snow, so we didn't know that. So then we can start. Let's spread that around so everybody gets straight on that.
Yeah, and if I get any hate mail from Canadians, it's okay. I don't mind.
So you've got some dates coming up. For the folks out there who are listening, go to edroman.net. And there's everything is there. There's a great video that's shot on your in Jamaica with the song. The music video to the song Jamaica is right there on the front page. All the touring information, Ed's bio, everything you want to know about Ed to become a complete and total Ed head. Is there anything else that you want to plug or talk about before we wrap up?
I'm doing these series of 4 little videos right now. They're all about a minute and 40 seconds long. And what they really are is like sort of corporate tribunal hearings on the lyrical content of Letters from High Latitude. They're fictitious, obviously, people. But the total of 4 that will summate, if you go to my YouTube channel, Special Ed Roman, you'll see them there. They're the latest 2 videos. The 4 of them are really the beginning of my release, hey, there's a record coming. It's going to be called Red Omen. And the 4th video will illustrate where that's leading. So look for it. I'm having fun making them, and they're somewhere like a cross between Das Boot and Clockwork Orange.
Wow. Wow, that's a combination. Letters from High Latitudes is Ed's latest release that he has out right now. So you can, again, go to edroman.net. You can get all the information. There's iTunes, Amazon, and everything. Ed, it was really good talking to you, man.
Lou, it was great talking to you, man. Nice being on your show. I really appreciate it.
Well, we're looking forward to maybe speaking with you in the future. And in the meantime, good luck with your new record. You're heading back to Jamaica anytime soon?
We're planning a trip for February, probably 3 weeks this time, back to Papa Curvin's place. He's another recording artist. He's got a recording studio there. That's where I was at last time, filled with musicians, recording and playing music all day. That's where I like to be.
All right. Okay, Ed. Hey, buddy, you have a great rest of the day, and we will be watching for your new record and listening to Letters from High Latitude. All right?
Thank you,
Take care, man.
Thank you, Lou, and happy Father's Day coming up to everybody in Canada and happening everywhere.
All right, I'll see you later, man. Thanks.
See you. Thanks, Lou.
Bye.